Hey, everybody out there. Thanks for tuning in. Let me ask you a question. Are you interested in horror comic books? Well, then you probably want to check out the Phobia Kickstarter that's live right now. And the link is below in the information. You're going to want to check it out because this is a comic book written by moi. And it's a horror comic book. And it's live on Kickstarter right now. And today I want to take a moment to talk about some of my favorite horror comics that I've been reading for the past several years, going back at least a decade, if not more. You're here with Derrick Acosta and Johnny.
Hey, I'm here.
How you doing? And we
doing great.
We thank you for joining us, everybody. So, Johnny, did you know that I launched a comic book?
Oh yeah.
It's currently, and I'm happy to say, currently, as of recording this, the #1 funded comic book anthology on Kickstarter.
That's badass.
Yeah, it's been live for a few days now. We launched it over the weekend, and things have been going good. Things have been going great, actually. I was a little nervous before I went live with this campaign.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I was afraid nobody would want to fund it.
I had no doubt.
You had no doubt?
Zero doubt.
A lot of people who I had told about the project were super positive about it and were very encouraging to me and said that, you know, this thing is gonna work out, but you know, like, you never know. And I had these fears and these doubts that I wouldn't make the goal or that people wouldn't care, but pretty much based on the response now, I no longer have that fear. I'm feeling pretty confident that we're gonna make it, and I'm super excited. This is a project that I've been working on for over a year. The idea came to me back in 2014, so this is 8 years in the making. Have you ever held on to a creative project for 8 years?
Kinda, yeah. I do have a couple locked in the Johnny vault.
Well, let this be an inspiration to you.
100%.
And let this be an inspiration to anybody out there as well. If you have one of those ideas that's just been stuck in your brain for over half a decade,
Yeah.
maybe now is the time to finally go for it. So if you have a chance, if you haven't seen it already, please go check out the Phobia Volume 1 Anthology Kickstarter. Just check it out. And while you're there, think about supporting it.
Worth some money if it makes you scared.
I like that. I like that. I like that a lot. So, my favorite genre of any type of media is horror. In books, in movies. But I always have to say, not video games. I hate horror video games.
Okay.
I can't handle horror video games.
I'm the polar opposite. Like, for me, comedy is like my favorite, but I love horror video games. I don't know why. I like being in control more.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I do a lot of comedy, obviously, for Mega 64. That's what I'm known for. And I feel like there is a connection between writing comedy and writing horror.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I've been telling people when they feel like, do you think that you can lean on your comedy background to write these stories? Absolutely. Because it's about setting up an interesting hook and then getting people invested. And then right when they least suspect it, you kind of give them a twist that they weren't ready for. And in comedy, it's a twist that kind of elicits a positive response, like, oh my gosh, it's so funny. And in horror, you kind of yank the rug out from underneath them and they're like, oh my God, I didn't want that to happen. That's terrible. And then it makes them feel like sad or, you know, that horrible, horrific feeling. But yeah, they're very similar. Set up in punchline or set up in rug pull, as I like to say. But what we're here to do today is I have a stack from my personal comic book collection, and I want to go through some of my favorite horror comic books to share with people out there, some of the books that inspired me, and I'll point out the ones that were particularly inspiring for Phobia. I want to start out with the best, in my opinion. I'm just going to go straight for the top. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to give you the #1 horror comic of all time, in my opinion.
Oh, wow.
In my opinion. And it's this book right here, Pym and Francie by Colombia. If you haven't heard of this book, I'm not surprised. I didn't hear about this book for many years. Now, why is this the best horror comic of all time? It's unlike all other comics.
Yeah.
It has pretty much no narrative in here. There's almost, look how thick this book is. There's almost no story in this book.
I think this is a collection of like his comics, right?
Yeah, this is the rare collector's edition. I tracked this down at Comic-Con a few years ago.
Yeah.
And when I found out about this book, people actually, the way they wrote about it online made me so curious. They actually recommended, like, don't pick up this book.
Yeah.
Because it will give you nightmares. Literal nightmare fuel. A lot of people describe this book as haunted. They say that this book will stick with you.
It's very twisted.
And it'll get inside your mind.
Yeah.
And you'll be thinking about it long after you've read it, despite the fact that it has almost no narrative.
And I don't think much is actually known about Al Colombia as well.
It's very mysterious.
Yeah.
It's a very mysterious author. It's a very mysterious book. It's unfinished. And some of the drawings in here almost seem like rough drafts or sketches. But it follows these two child characters named Pym and Francie. You've read this book?
Oh, yeah. I own this as well.
Okay, nice. And Pym and Francie are illustrated in almost like this Max Fleischer early 1930s style. Almost like a cartoon style, like Steamboat Willie, you know, like and Betty Boop, those old cartoons from the 30s.
Yeah, I think they call it rubber hose animation.
Yes, it's all black and white, and it all feels like it's left over from a long time ago. This one, I don't know if we'll be able to see this on screen, but this is one that's always like kind of haunted me. It's a guy with 6 arms. You can't see that on screen, but he's like maneuvering a bunch of blades.
There's like a character giving birth in this comic, and I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? It's kind of morbid.
You turn the page, and it's another shot of him, and he's standing in front of a house, and the house is kind of like cast in silhouettes and shadows. And it's like, okay, weird. Just 2 pictures of this multi-armed blade guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next page says, across the street, the golden fawn hopped in circles, and it's a drawing of a deer, right? We turn the page again, and we see Pym and Francie like playing on a hill, and this guy with the knives is just across the street behind them as if he's following them, and they just don't know about it. And that's when this like implied narrative starts to develop, because there's no story. I don't know what's going on here. Now we turn the page and they're walking through a field, and this guy is just off in the distance on the horizon. It's almost like kind of like a silhouette of him, but you could just see, like, once again, he's following them. It gives you like It Follows vibes. And then we just move on. We just move on to the next story.
That's what's stuck with me for a while.
And that is kind of the nature of this book, just incomplete stories, kind of nightmarish images, a lot of things that are cast in shadows, a lot of like creatures. This is decapitated cat head in here. So this, in my opinion, is the #1 horror comic of all time.
Hell yeah.
Pym and Francie by Al Colombia. You got to check it out. I'm going to move on now to one that you probably haven't heard of. Once again, not a traditional horror comic, but it's called Monsters by Ken Dahl. K-E-N is his first name, Ken, like the Ken doll, and then D-A-H-L. And Monsters is the story of a guy who has herpes. You would think like, ew, gross. No, the way that it's written, this is such a heartbreaking story. The opening line is, imagine never kissing anyone on the lips ever again.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like immediately you're like, okay, I'm drawn into it. And he just goes on to describe, like, what if you couldn't kiss your children or make out at a party or share food? I don't know, like, I felt like this was a very personal story. You know, it's like this weird, realistic kind of body horror where he feels like he is turning into this unlovable creature because he has contracted herpes. And he goes through this whole story of like trying to have relationships. And, you know, it's emotionally taxing. So this is kind of, it's a drama story. It's not really scary, but it is a form, I think, of like body horror.
Yeah.
Right? But it's really an interesting read on a topic that most people wouldn't consider worthy of making a comic about.
Mm-hmm.
Now I want to go back in time a little bit and talk about Phobia and one of the main books that inspired the creation of Phobia. In 2014, I went to San Diego Comic Fest, which was like a smaller convention here in San Diego. I was just, for whatever reason, going through the old comics. I never knew shit about like old comics from the 70s.
Yeah.
And I was picking through them, and I found this series of comics called Slow Death. I was like, Slow Death? What is this? And I ended up, this is something I got years later because I actually got individual issues of Slow Death. But this is called Slow Death Zero. And this is a graphic novel that they released just a few years ago, which is kind of like a compilation of some of the best Slow Death comics from back in the day and some new additions that have been added recently. This is what they call like eco horror. And the point of Slow Death originally, when they put it out in the 70s, was to raise awareness about problems that they thought were actually facing the world.
Ooh.
Like pollution, the whaling industry, because at the time a bunch of whales were on the brink of extinction because they hadn't outlawed whaling. So Slow Death is a reference to how us humans on planet Earth are causing our own slow death by ignoring the environmental issues that are happening around the world. And they started releasing themed issues. They did like an environmental issue, and then they did a nuclear issue about the problems with nuclear proliferation.
Okay.
Global warming issue. Like in the 80s, they did a global warming issue. Before this was even like a politicized topic.
Yeah, it feels like a evil Captain Planet.
Basically, it is. Even though they're talking about real world issues that are super serious, they kind of approach them with a sense of humor and irony, you know, like a devil may care attitude of like, yeah, we really are killing ourselves, but nobody cares. It's an interesting way to approach things that I think is just rooted in kind of like the comics of the 70s and the energy and the vibe that they had, the underground comics, which is nobody's reading this stuff anyways, so we can kind of say whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah, yeah.
And we could talk about serious subjects, but we don't have to be too serious about it, you know. It's a little bit tongue-in-cheek while still expressing something that is close to the heart of the people who are creating these comics. So then, keeping in line with older comics, here's another one that I really love. This is called Twisted Tales. This is almost like Tales from the Crypt, but Tales from the Crypt originated in the 50s. Mm-hmm. Twisted Tales is from the late 70s and early 80s. And these are it's another horror anthology. This is just a more traditional horror anthology. These are just scary stories. And they're all written by this guy named Bruce Jones.
Okay.
But they all feature different artists. So this is pretty much exactly what I did. And I was inspired by Bruce Jones. Eventually, he lost the right to do Twisted Tales because it was owned by a company. So he re-released it as The Twisted Tales of Bruce Jones. So this is like a sequel. So I have 2 issues of Twisted Tales here, and I have 2 issues of The Twisted Tales of Bruce Jones, but they're all written by Bruce Jones. And this was a big inspiration for me. This idea that like I could just be the writer and then I could get a bunch of different artists to contribute to illustrating the stories that I'm coming up with. One of the stories in Twisted Tales that I love is about these trick-or-treaters. It takes place on Halloween, and every house they go to, they're wearing like regular stupid Halloween costumes. Like one's a skeleton, one's a ghost, one's a vampire, one's Frankenstein, whatever. And every house they go to, the families are like horrified to see them. And they're like, oh my God, no, get out of here. Get out. What do you want? What do you want? When they go to the final house, the family is like crying and they're like, please don't take him. Please don't take him. But there's one kid who's like hiding in the house and the trick-or-treaters are like, he has to come with us. And you find out that like these kids years ago when they were trick-or-treating, they played a prank and they accidentally like burned down the house of a kid and he died in the fire.
Okay.
And every year since, that kid on Halloween goes trick-or-treating and he stops at all of the houses of the children who lit his house on fire. And one by one, he takes them. So the first year he took one kid and he took him to the house and that kid was never seen again until the next Halloween. And then both of those kids came.
Okay.
And they came for the next kid.
It's scary.
And they took him. And now it's a group of 4 of them. And in this story, they're coming to get the last kid.
I like the intrigue of that because you're like, oh, why are these people afraid of these kids? And then you kind of learn.
Yeah, and then it ends at like this burned down house.
Yeah.
And you kind of like get the big reveal of like, oh, this is like a curse that has infected this town because these kids did this horrible deed. Mm-hmm. Pretty cool. So I recommend Twisted Tales by Bruce Jones. If you can find a copy, they're not too expensive. And if you just go into like the older comics sections or the underground comics sections of your local comic book store, you'll probably be able to find some Twisted Tales for, like $5 or $7. Another comic that I tracked down from a few years ago that I actually love, it's a comic book series called Pestilence.
Okay.
Pestilence, it takes place during the Dark Ages, and it's about a group of medieval knights, like Templars, who are living in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And what's cool about that, why I didn't expect to like it, I was like, zombies are played out, man. We've done zombies. I get zombies.
Yeah.
But imagine zombies in a feudal environment. No phones, no television, no cars. This really plays into like a band of wandering warriors are just going through the countryside and there's no safe haven. They only have themselves to rely on.
Yeah.
Like they just live and die by the sword, and literally like everybody is their enemy.
I love that.
Because everybody's a fucking zombie.
Yeah, fuck them.
And it's kind of awesome. And what I really like about it is it's a fully succinct story arc from issue 1 to issue 6. It's just a really cool, like self-contained story. So Pestilence. This next one, they're turning into a movie, actually, right now. So read it before you see the film. It's called The House on the Borderland.
Okay.
And this is one of my favorite comic books of all time. It's put out by Vertigo. This is a one-shot. And The House on the Borderland is actually a horror novella that was written like over 100 years ago, I want to say.
Wow.
But they took the book and they adapted it into a comic book. And what The House on the Borderland is about is these two young guys are traveling through the countryside in like Scotland or Ireland, and they come to the ruins of a house. And in the ruins, they find a journal that documents what happened at that house.
Okay.
And that's where the story kicks off, because they basically get the story of this guy who lived in the house, and the house was next to a trench. Inside this trench lived these like pig-like monster, like pigmen beasts. And at night, the pigmen beasts come out of, it's like a cave. It's like a big trench, like a steamy cave. At night, they come out of the cave and they basically like prowl his property. And they're trying to get into his house every single night.
Okay. That kind of sounds like Omega Man a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And so The House on the Borderland is about him, and I think he lives there with his sister, and he just basically tries to protect his house from these pigmen from invading it. But of course he can't, and they eventually like work their way inside. But there's some more backstory there as well as to like where they came from and why they want to get into the house. And it's a very cool like gothic horror novel. It's this big estate, mansion, gothic mansion, kind of like Frankenstein's castle, secret passages, monsters like prowling the property, working their way in.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. And they're making a movie out of it. So The House on the Borderland, I highly recommend it. In fact, it's been a while since I've read this. I might need to go back and revisit it. And then, of course, everybody's favorite horror manga artist.
The King,
Junji Ito.
Shouts out. Save
the best for last. Now, I already said I love Pym and Francie. I think that's the greatest horror comic of all time, but a lot of people will say Junji Ito and Uzumaki is the greatest horror comic / manga of all time. But you know what? My attention span is short.
Yeah, they're long.
So what I have here are two of his anthologies.
Both great.
Remember here, I'm advertising my anthology, Phobia Volume 1, available on Kickstarter now. This is Shiver and Smashed. And if anybody has never read Junji Ito, whoops, I'm holding it upside down. These are the books that I recommend they dive into 100%. First. Shiver and Smashed. They're both equally good.
Is the one where the people like go into the cliffside where the holes are shaped like them in that?
I don't think that's in these, but
that's one of my favorite
I know that's
shorts.
your favorite story. Yeah. What you have in here are the balloons that look like people's heads.
Yeah. A lot of these were adapted into the anime. Don't watch the anime. Read these.
Read the book. Yeah. Junji Ito, if you're not familiar with him, deals in what is known as cosmic horror, where your reality just breaks.
Yeah.
Something happens that is so far removed from reality, it makes you feel like you're going insane. But what is so great about Junji Ito is he takes his time and he's so meticulous with it that he really finds the logical response to this reality breaking thing, right?
Yeah.
Like all of his characters in each of these stories, they're faced with something that is so unbelievable, and yet for them, it's actually fucking happening. So they are faced with this dilemma of like, how do I even go about responding to this?
Yeah. So scary.
The one with balloons is like one day a town has all of these balloons float into town, but the balloons look like severed heads of the people who live in the towns, and they have a little string hanging down from them. And the people are fascinated by this because they're like, what are these floating heads, and what do they do? And the heads come up and they wrap the string around the people and they cinch them up.
Yeah.
And they kill them via, choking them out.
They get choked out.
They choke them out. And it literally, like, everybody in the town, one by one, starts to get picked off. And the main character, when we pick up in the story, is like one of the few people still left in town. And the balloons are like outside her window, like bopping up against the window, trying to get her. They're just all waiting for her.
Yeah.
And she's literally thinking like, how do I even continue to live my life like this? Like, what is there left for me to do? Like, I can't believe this. And then it kind of backtracks and explains how she got there, but impossible, like, world-breaking, reality-shattering situation, and she just has to like logically think her way out of it.
Yeah, I just love he like really thinks about like your mental state in these situations. I feel like a lot of people don't think about that. Also, I feel like Junji Ito is like the king of the splash page. He has pages where like you get to them sometimes and you're like, don't want to turn it. You're like, oh my God. Like he just shows you this horrific, like he waits and then he shows you this just gigantic, horrific image that like sends chills down your spine.
Yeah. There's one story in Smashed that did inspire me a lot, and it's actually the titular story. It is the story called Smash.
Mm-hmm.
And it is about, and I'm going to spoil it, so if you don't want to know what Smash is about, I won't spoil it too much, but I probably will spoil it. These people find this like jar of honey and they drink it, and it's so delicious they become addicted to it. They can't stop drinking it. But it comes with a warning, and it says, if you drink this honey too much, it'll get you. And one day they go in and they find their friend has been drinking it, and he's literally like smashed against the wall.
Oh my God.
He's like flattened against the wall. Brains have exploded out of it. He's flat as a fucking pancake. Every bone in his body is crushed.
Good.
He's exploded out of his skin. He's smashed.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, that's what happens to you when you drink the honey? And they're like, we can't drink this honey anymore. But then the more they try to stop drinking it, but they just are so drawn to it. It's like they're going insane,
Exactly.
trying to resist it. And so they drink the honey, but they try to like, okay, if we're going to drink it, we just have to take little sips quickly, because if you drink it too much, it'll get you. And here's the spoiler. They find out that it comes from South America.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this plant that they get the honey from that is like this interdimensional. This plant exists on multiple dimensions, and it's like this giant writhing like vine tree. And when they see the tree, they see it like whoosh, whoosh, like lashing out into the air, and they realize that it can transcend space-time, and it can smash people on any place on Earth.
That's so sick.
If those people are drinking the honey from it. And while they're watching the tree, or as they're like approaching the tree, a mosquito like lands on one of the people, and they go, ah! And that's his only clue to the reader as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And if you're perceptive, you realize
You are the mosquito.
you are the mosquito.
Yeah.
That's what it's like to be a mosquito.
Yeah.
There's this
So smart.
There's this alluring nectar
Yeah.
that you just can't resist. On a fundamental level, your whole being craves to drink this. But if you drink it too much, you'll arouse the attention and the ire of the source of the liquid.
Yeah.
And it'll get you.
Dude.
And I just thought, like, this motherfucker took mosquitoes
And made it scary.
and made it into a human horror story. Like, the level of inspiration, I was just so blown away. Like, he could draw inspiration from anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, I need to look into unknown unconventional places for the inspiration of my horror stories.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing I took away from Smashed. I was like, you really can draw inspiration from anything if you just dial up kind of the weirdness and the creativity with it.
Yeah, he's so masterful at that. Like even his story Gyo is like, what if fish were able to walk on land?
Yeah.
Like it's just like he just kind of throws things.
I'll
outside.
tell you, everybody out there. Now, here's a story I wrote for Phobia that I was not able to get to work. This is a failed story, but I'm still working on it, and I want to make it work. But it's a story about a haunted music video.
Okay.
And you watch the music video, and the legend of the music video. It's about these two guys who do a haunted podcast. It was inspired by you and me.
Shit.
It was inspired by Make It Strange.
Oh man.
It's about you and me, and we find out about a haunted music video.
Okay. And
the premise of the video is everybody in the video is dead.
Okay.
Everybody.
Yeah.
The singer's dead. The band is dead. And there's shots of a music festival.
Uh-huh.
And every single person in the audience is also dead.
Okay. That's
cool. And it's like this legend. Like people have confirmed it. Like they've looked up every single person in the fucking video and they're all dead. And as we're starting to watch the video, it's not really you and me, but it's based on you and me.
Yeah.
As we're starting to watch the video, we start recognizing people from our own lives. Like, yo, pause it. That's my cousin who died when I was like 10.
Oh no.
Yo, that's my teacher who died when I was in 9th grade. We start seeing people that we know in the video. And then one night we're watching, we're like researching the podcast, and then you fucking flip out. And I'm like, what's wrong? And you're like, I saw myself in the video. And then I can't find you.
Oh no.
You vanish. You vanish. And it turns into this Junji Ito story where I keep watching the video and I see you in the crowd.
Mm.
And then I see other people from the town in the crowd. And by the end of the story, I'm the last, I say me, but the main character is the last person left. And you vanished, right? You're in the video. You're dead now. You're gone.
Yeah.
Everybody in the town has vanished. And I see them all in the crowd.
Okay.
Of the music video, and I'm the only and I'm just waiting. The story ends with like, I don't know when I'm going to show up in the video, but I know it's inevitable. But basically, like everybody else I know is in the video.
I like to imagine it's like the music video is heaven, because it's like everyone's having a good time, but it's like that's where you go when you die, is this music video.
Maybe, yeah. It's a cursed video.
Yeah.
And if you watch it, eventually you'll see people you know in there. And if they're dead, they're already in there. And if they're alive, you'll never see them again.
Oh my God.
Haven't quite found a way to...
That's sick, though.
...make it work for my comic, but that's kind of like the germ of an idea I'm working on, just to give you a taste on some of the stuff that you may see coming up if you pick up that issue of Phobia.
Hell yeah.
So, if you want to get your hands on it, just go to the Kickstarter. Select the rewards here. You can get a physical copy. You can get digital copies. You can get an autographed copy. I'm also offering some behind-the-scenes packages, which are, I made this because this is my first time creating a comic, and I want to share the process with people. So if you've ever wanted to make a comic book, we have a template for writing a script, which is what I used to take my ideas and share them with illustrators so that I wrote the words and they would create the art. This is how we did it. Comic book scripts are kind of hard to find. They're a little bit rare.
Oh, yeah.
So you can sign up, and it's a behind-the-scenes zine that has the template. It has the sample scripts of my comic book. So you can actually read the scripts and then read the comic book and see how it translates. And then there is an educational reading list on all of the resources I use to kind of like wrap my head around how to make comics. It's like just books I read to learn, how you write comics and how you get them made. So that's an option too, all there on the Kickstarter. The link is below in the information, so check it out. And that's pretty much all I had to share for today.
Yeah, that was rad. I definitely want to read some of these for sure.
I hope so, yeah. And I have a lot more, but these were just some of my favorites. Hey, I hope you enjoyed our little program here today. I hope you're into horror comics, and check out Phobia Volume 1 on Kickstarter. Thanks for watching, everybody.